Halloween has always been a night of masks. A night when people can become whoever they want. And sometimes, when they disappear behind that mask for good. For Cindy Song, it began like every other college celebration in State College, Pennsylvania. She was 22, a senior student at Penn State University, studying integrative arts. A Korean girl who had left Seoul years ago to build a new life in America. She was small, bright, endlessly kind. One of those people whose laughter made you believe that ordinary days could still feel like home. On the evening of October 31st, 2001, Cindy dressed as a bunny. Pink top, white miniskirt, fuzzy ears, a small tail. A costume meant to be fun, harmless, a little silly. She and her two friends, Stacy Parks and Lisa Kim, left the apartment shortly after 9 p.m. and headed for a nightclub called Players Nightclub on College Avenue. The city was alive that night. Streets glowing with orange lights, cold air buzzing with laughter and the smell of alcohol and late-night pizza. For a few hours, everything felt light. At around 2 a.m., the three decided to stop by another friend's house for a short after-party. They watched videos, snacked, and talked about classes. Cindy seemed tired but content. There was no sign of anything strange. Sometime after 3 a.m., she told her friends she was ready to go home. Stacy offered her a ride. They dropped her off at her apartment complex, Park Hill Apartments, just outside the Penn State campus. That was the last time anyone saw her. The parking lot was quiet. A single street lamp buzzed faintly over the asphalt. Cindy stepped out of the car, thanked Stacy, waved, and walked toward the entrance. She had her purse, her phone, her keys, everything. She unlocked the door, went inside, and then, somehow, between that door and the next morning, she vanished. When police entered her apartment 2 days later, nothing made sense. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle. Her bag was on the table, makeup scattered in the bathroom sink. The false eyelashes she wore that night lay neatly beside the faucet, as if she'd started to remove her costume before bed. The half-opened candy bag from the Halloween party sat on the counter. It was as if she'd come home, begun to unwind, and then simply stopped existing. Her phone and car keys were still there. Her car remained parked outside. Investigators searched the area, the woods behind the complex, the nearby bus stops, every alley that could have hidden her. Nothing. No clothing, no scent trail, no witnesses. Just silence. Days turned into weeks. Flyers with her photo, a smiling girl with straight brown hair and kind eyes, began covering poles and cafe windows across State College. Her family flew in from South Korea, her mother's hands shaking as she handed out missing person posters. The local news ran short updates, but the story faded faster than anyone expected. There were no leads, no evidence, just an apartment that felt too quiet, and a mother who couldn't stop calling her daughter's phone, even though she knew no one would answer. The police began to consider possibilities. Did Cindy run away? There was no reason. She had no debts, no history of depression, no arguments with friends. She'd just paid her rent and bought new cosmetics. Did someone take her? If so, how did they enter her apartment without breaking a lock, without leaving a print, without being seen? One neighbor later recalled hearing something, maybe a door closing, maybe muffled voices, around 4 a.m. But in a college town full of parties, noises at dawn meant nothing. Weeks later, investigators received a call from a woman who claimed she'd seen a girl matching Cindy's description near a highway convenience store outside Philadelphia. roughly 90 miles away. The girl, she said, looked disoriented, terrified. She was with a man, older, dark hair, driving a black Honda Civic. The girl kept repeating, "I'm not supposed to be here." By the time police arrived, there was no one there. That single statement, "I'm not supposed to be here," became the haunting echo that shaped every retelling of Cindy's story. Her friends described her as deeply cautious, almost timid. She didn't drink much, didn't wander alone. The idea that she'd gone missing voluntarily made no sense. Investigators interviewed dozens of people who'd attended the same Halloween parties that night, but no one remembered anything unusual. Everyone saw a girl laughing, dancing, living a normal night. Then, months later, a possible connection surfaced. A man named Hugo Selensky was arrested in Luzerne County for unrelated murders. When police searched his property, they found multiple human remains and evidence linking him to several disappearances. One witness claimed that Selensky and his accomplice once bragged about kidnapping a woman from State College who looked Asian and forcing her into a car before killing her. But there was never proof. No body, no object that tied Cindy directly to Selensky. The lead, like all others, evaporated. Years went by. Every Halloween, small memorials appeared outside her old apartment building. Pumpkins with her name carved into them, candles flickering in the autumn wind. Her friends refused to let her story die, but the world had already moved on. The media stopped caring. The posters faded under the rain. There is something uniquely terrifying about a disappearance without struggle. No noise, no break-in, no blood, just absence. Deliberate, clean, impossible to reconstruct. If Cindy had been taken, whoever did it understood how to erase a person completely. If she left willingly, it means she planned something none of her friends ever guessed, and left every sign behind on purpose, as if to confuse anyone who came looking. But one detail never sat right. The candy bag, half opened, untouched for days. Her friend Lisa said Cindy had a sweet tooth. She would have finished it. That little detail, meaningless to most, became a symbol of interruption, of a moment cut in half. By winter, the investigation lost funding. Police classified the case as inactive, pending new information. Her mother returned to Korea, her voice breaking when she spoke to reporters. Maybe she's cold somewhere. Maybe she can't find her way home. Cindy Song's disappearance remains one of the most disturbing unsolved cases connected to Halloween. A night built on pretending to be someone else, only for one person to vanish entirely. They called it voluntary absence in the paperwork. But those who knew her believe otherwise. Because Cindy wasn't the kind of girl who disappeared into darkness. She was the kind of girl who left lights on, so she wouldn't be scared coming home. And maybe that's what makes her story linger. Not the mystery itself, but the simplicity of it. A girl in a costume, a walk to her door, and then nothing. A night full of noise that ended in perfect silence. By the time winter reached Pennsylvania, the cold had become another investigator in Cindy's case. It seeped into everything. The posters on the lampposts, the notebooks filled with phone numbers, the hollow sound of unanswered calls. Detectives still checked her apartment once a week, even though there was nothing left to check. The air inside had the strange stillness of a place that once belonged to someone. Her perfume still lingered faintly, a synthetic sweetness mixed with dust and old carpet. Her slippers were near the bed. Her desk lamp had burned out sometime during the investigation, and no one had replaced the bulb. Her friends came by sometimes just to sit. They said it felt like she could still walk through the door, but she never did. Investigators built a timeline, every hour from the Halloween night to the moment she vanished. The last confirmed sighting was at 3:05 a.m., when her friend Stacy dropped her off near the entrance of Park Hill Apartments. Surveillance cameras weren't common in 2001, not in student complexes. There was no footage, no image of her entering the building. Only Stacy's statement and the silence that followed. For a while, detectives clung to small inconsistencies. Someone claimed they saw a woman in a bunny costume near a gas station a few miles away. Another said they heard a scream near the park. But every lead dissolved under scrutiny. Every time they tried to follow a thread, it ended in the same place, nowhere. They expanded the search to nearby highways, forests, abandoned farmhouses. Volunteers formed human chains, walking through frozen fields with flashlights, calling her name. But no one ever answered. One night, a police officer working the midnight shift reported something strange. A car, black sedan, windows tinted, parked near the woods behind the apartment complex. When he approached, the engine started and the vehicle sped off without headlights. They ran the plates. They belonged to a rental, issued in another county, returned 2 days later, cleaned. Inside, there was nothing. Whoever had rented it used fake identification, cash deposit, no paper trail. It was the first moment investigators began to believe Cindy's disappearance wasn't random. Her mother, Kim, refused to accept that Cindy was dead. She stayed in the U.S. for months, renting a small apartment near State College, calling the police almost daily. Every morning, she visited the campus, handing out flyers with her daughter's photo. She didn't speak English well, but she repeated the same words again and again. "Please, find her. Please, my daughter, she's small. She's afraid of dark." She left offerings at the foot of trees, in small bowls, food, incense, folded notes written in Korean. Locals began leaving flowers there too, even if they didn't know her. By March 2002, the case had become what officers call a cold trail. The media had moved on. Even among detectives, conversations began to fade. The file sat on a shelf labeled S. Song, Missing Person. And then, one night, a tip came in. A woman named Heather, working at a convenience store along Interstate 80 near Philadelphia, told police she'd seen a young Asian woman fitting Cindy's description several months earlier. The girl, she said, looked frightened. She was with a man, tall, around 40, unshaven, wearing a dark coat. He paid for cigarettes and fuel while the girl stood behind him, clutching her purse tightly, eyes lowered. Heather remembered because the girl had whispered something strange under her breath. "I can't go back." When she looked again, the car was gone. The police took her statement, traced the surveillance footage, but by then, it was too late. The recordings had already been overwritten. Still, the description of the man, black hair, pale skin, dark coat, echoed something familiar. 2 counties over, detectives had an active file on a man named Hugo Selensky. Selensky was not just another criminal. He was a manipulator, a career con artist, and, as they would later discover, a killer. In 2003, police searching his property found human remains buried in his backyard, bound with rope. 2 of the victims were missing drug dealers, but there were also bones that didn't match any known file. Selensky's name began circulating among investigators in State College. He matched the type, the area, the timeline. One inmate claimed Selensky once boasted about abducting a young woman from Penn State and disposing of her near the mountains. When questioned, he smiled and said nothing. They searched his property again. Nothing tied to Cindy. No jewelry, no clothing, no ID. And yet, some officers remained convinced that's where she ended up. But the case never reached proof. No warrant, no confession, no physical trace. The story drifted into myth. Years passed. The apartments changed tenants. The flyers disintegrated under snow and rain. Students who moved in after 2005 had never even heard her name. But for those who had known her, the friends, the professors, the quiet people from the art department, every Halloween still felt heavier than the rest. They remembered the way she laughed when she was nervous, how she painted small watercolor flowers in the corners of her notebooks. They remembered that she once said she believed ghosts stay only if someone remembers them. Maybe that's why they kept saying her name. In 2006, a detective named Jeffrey Nelson reopened the case unofficially. He had been a rookie in 2001, now a seasoned investigator with a personal obsession. He drove to every location mentioned in the original file. The club, the convenience store, Selensky's old house, the woods behind Park Hill. He built his own map, connecting them with red string and notes that said things like timing gap 20 minutes and no witnesses past 3 a.m. One night, sitting in his car outside the old complex, he wrote something in his notebook. If she walked into that door, someone was already waiting. He began to consider an alternate scenario. Not a random abduction, not a stranger. What if someone she knew was inside the apartment? Someone with access, with keys, someone she trusted. He tracked every maintenance worker, every neighbor who'd lived there in 2001. Most were gone, moved out of state. One had died. But a man named Michael P., a building contractor, still lived nearby. When Nelson found him, he noticed something strange. The man avoided eye contact, refused to answer questions about that night, and insisted he barely remembered anything. Later, records showed that this man had been arrested years earlier for unlawful restraint involving another young woman. The charges were dropped, but the pattern was there. Still, again, no evidence. Another lead swallowed by time. What remained constant was the silence. A silence that started to feel deliberate. No one saw. No one heard. No one confessed. The universe simply deleted one human being and sealed the space she left behind. Investigators sometimes describe this kind of disappearance as a clean break. Not physically clean, but narratively. As if someone had gone back into the story and cut out a single line of dialogue so precisely that the rest of the paragraph still makes sense. Cindy's case was like that. Everything around her kept functioning. Rent payments, phone bills, utilities, university records, all suddenly irrelevant, yet still perfectly in order. It's what made her story so uniquely haunting. Not what was found, but what wasn't. By 2011, a decade after she vanished, Penn State held a small memorial in her name. There was no casket, no photograph beyond the one everyone already knew. Just a candlelight vigil near the campus library. Her professors spoke softly, her friends stood in silence, and her mother, back from Seoul for the anniversary, said only one sentence. If she is gone, she is still my daughter. The wind that night carried the smell of early snow. People say you could hear the faint echo of laughter somewhere behind the trees, like the sound of someone remembering her. That same year, an independent journalist revisited the story for a regional documentary series. He discovered an unlogged report from 2002, a short, handwritten memo from a patrol officer who had responded to a call about a disturbance near the wooded area behind the apartment complex. The report mentioned finding a piece of pink fabric, possibly clothing, caught on a branch near the ground. It was never analyzed. It disappeared from evidence before the lab could test it. No one ever determined whether it was part of her Halloween costume. When this surfaced, it reignited the story online. Forums began speculating about the Bunny Girl case, a nickname that both trivialized and immortalized her. Theories multiplied: that she'd been taken by a stalker, that she'd been targeted by someone connected to Zelensky's network, or that she'd been the victim of a serial offender preying on Halloween nights. But for every theory, there was a hole large enough to swallow it whole. In 2018, technology brought a small glimmer of hope. Advances in DNA sequencing allowed Pennsylvania State Police to re-examine old evidence boxes. Among the items logged under Cindy's case was a faint trace of biological material collected from under the apartment's front doorknob. It had been too degraded to test in 2001. Now, they tried again. The sample belonged to a male, but it didn't match anyone in CODIS, the National DNA Database. It was both something and nothing, a whisper without a mouth. The new detective in charge, Elise Grant, described it in one interview. Sometimes, cases like this feel like the universe dangling a thread, just enough to make sure you never stop pulling. She reopened public calls for information. Dozens of tips came in, most useless, some strange. One woman claimed her ex-boyfriend confessed to being the man with the bunny girl. Another insisted Cindy was alive, living under a different name in Nevada. None could be verified. The file thickened. The truth thinned. Somewhere in those years, the line between fact and folklore blurred. Students whispered about the Halloween apartment, where lights flickered every October, where people said they heard footsteps in the hall. Landlords stopped renting Unit 14B after midnight complaints from tenants. But those who'd been there since the beginning knew better. They knew it wasn't haunted. It was just heavy. A place where a story had stopped mid-sentence. 2 decades later, Cindy's story remains open. No arrest, no body, no closure. Her mother still sends a small donation every year to a Penn State scholarship fund in her name. Every transfer carries the same note: for my daughter who never came home. The detectives who worked the case have retired. The files sit in an archive basement, the ink fading on pages that once mattered to someone. But there's one thing they never wrote down. The part that everyone who investigated felt but couldn't prove. That Cindy's disappearance wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't random. It was orchestrated. Planned by someone who knew how to erase presence, not just physically, but emotionally, systematically. Someone who understood that the most terrifying crime isn't the one that leaves blood, but the one that leaves nothing at all. Sometimes, people ask why her story still circulates online after so many years. Maybe because she vanished on a night dedicated to pretending, when everyone was already hiding behind masks. Or maybe because deep down, we all understand the fragility of that walk home. The few steps between safety and silence. Cindy's song didn't disappear into the night. She walked into it, thinking she was almost home. And somewhere in the dark, something waited that knew she was coming.